guys, it's Ashley, and in my video today I'm going to be doing my first 2017 wrap-up. So originally I was going to do monthly wrap-ups this year, but I'm deciding to split it off into quarters. So I'm just going to do a wrap-up after every 3 months. So this wrap-up is going to encompass all of January, February, and March. And I read 20 books in total in January, February, and March. And so I'm just going to give a really quick synopsis and rating and very short review on each of these books that I read in those months, and I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So the first book I read this year was Black Widow Forever Read, which is by Margaret Stohl. And this is a book about Black Widow from the Marvel Universe, and this is supposed to go in canon with the actual movies themselves. Marvel is a publisher on this book, I believe, so this goes with all the movies in the cinematic universe and everything. And this is about a 16-year-old girl named Ava, and she was raised in the same Red Room as the Black Widow, or Natasha Romanoff was, and she was saved by the Black Widow and then never saw her again except for 16 years later when she's unknowingly put in danger and Black Widow has to come and rescue her. So they team up to try and stop this worldwide terror that's happening that Ava is unknowingly a part of. And this is that story of them seeing each other again for the first time and saving the world, and a couple of Marvel characters come into play here. We do see Tony Stark. We do get a lot more backstory on the Black Widow, which is nice. I just wish they would do that in the actual movies because that would be fantastic. So she deserves that, and we need to make that happen. I ended up giving this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. I did really enjoy it. I thought it was interesting and full of a lot of action, which you would expect from a Black Widow book. You know, you expect a lot of action and fast pace and things like that, which it did deliver on. I just was a little bit disappointed because it didn't feel like it was the best writing necessarily. Even though I liked the story itself, I just don't think it was necessarily told with a high caliber. And I really didn't like Ava as a character. I know she's been through a lot, but she just came off really whiny and just didn't really do much for me. I like Natasha. She did seem a lot like the movie version that's played by Scarlett Johansson. I do think the author did a great job of portraying her as she is in the cinematic universe. She translated it into book very well. For the most part, like I said, it did feel like it was lacking both in the storytelling of the plot, and she didn't quite get the sarcasm right with Natasha. She didn't quite get her tendency to feel, sometimes Natasha does have emotions, but I don't think she put those at the right moments in the book or portrayed them very well. So that's why I gave it 3.5 stars out of 5. It was just okay. It was good, but it wasn't bad. So it's just really straight down the middle for me. The second book I read was Winter Spell by Claire Legend. This is a Nutcracker retelling, which I was so excited for. I read it around Christmas time, but didn't finish it till January. But I actually used to be in ballet, and I performed the Nutcracker probably 13 times in my life, and so I was really invested in this. And this turned out to be one of the worst things I've ever read, to be quite honest with you. It was just weird and creepy, and not in a good way. The characters made some really creepy decisions that just made my skin crawl sometimes. Just the world building itself and the way Clara goes to what equivocates to Sugar Plum Fairy's land is just very messy. The world building itself is messy, and the characters weren't that interesting. The whole thing was just super awkward and not well done, and I found nothing redeemable about it. I gave it 1 star because what the hell was that? I don't even know why I read it. The third thing I read was the second Black Widow book, and that is Black Widow Red Vengeance. I got an electronic copy of it from NetGalley, and this was even more disappointing than the first one. It was so easy to predict. By the time I got 35 pages in, I already pretty much knew everything that was going to happen, and it ignored canon sometimes, which is really frustrating, and it just felt like a repeat of the first book. I just honestly didn't see the point in this book. It had the same structure pretty much as the first book, and nothing really new was introduced, so I don't understand what the point of this book was either. So that was really big letdown for me. It's just another story of Ava and Natasha, and there's a new crisis that they have to try and avoid and try and make stop. The whole thing was just predictable, and it was a really bad action movie. Honestly, there wasn't that much depth to the characters. They didn't grow very much by the end of the book, specifically with Natasha and Ava, so I ended up giving this book 1 out of 5 stars again. Next was Girl on a Train by Paula Hawkins, which I read for my book club in January, and this book I had really high expectations for because I know a lot of people in real life and online who have read this and really enjoyed it, but I was really let down by it. I, again, had the plot figured out, actually. I figured out, like, the mystery of it and what happened, who did everything, and why they did what they did. That was just really disappointing and kind of failed as a mystery book to me, and I really actually liked the movie better than the book. I think that Emily Blunt did a really great job of portraying Rachel and all the struggles she has, like, with alcohol and getting over the past and the things that Tom did to her, and I think she did a really great job of making that character fleshed out, and I just liked it so much better. I thought it was much more interesting, much more nail-biting, and a lot less boring than the book was, so I ended up giving this book like 2.5 out of 5 stars, but it wasn't necessarily poorly done. I just think that I have read so many mystery books in the past and seen so many mystery television shows and movies that I kind of can figure things out now. It takes a lot to surprise me, so basically it's not the book, it's me. And that's the reason I gave this book such a low rating. Next, I read an electronic copy of a book I got from NetGalley, and that is Black Greek Coffee by Konstantina Sezullo. And this is a collection of short stories about what it's like to live in Greek villages, and it takes place in modern times as well as like 20 years in the past. It tells the story of grandparents sometimes and what it was like for them like 50 years in the past, and it really does show a lot about what it's like to live in Greece and in some of those islands and villages and stuff. So I did feel really transported while I read it and felt like I was really there and in those families' homes and got to know their lives very well, but it was just really choppy, really rough. The settings were really clear, but unfortunately the writing wasn't so great, which knocked it down a couple stars for me. It just wasn't the most polished or professional writing I've ever seen, and so that knocked it down a couple stars for me. But like I said, I really got to know the narrator's lives in each of these stories and wish I even had spent a little more time with them sometimes. So I ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars, and I have a full review for it on Goodreads, and I'll leave that linked in the description below. Next, I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I actually picked up an audiobook version of this from the library, and it's read by Neil Gaiman himself. This one was kind of a random pickup for me, honestly. I just went to the library wanting any audiobook to get me through my commute to work, and so I picked up this one not knowing anything about it except that it's Neil Gaiman, it's short, and it's magical realism. And I thought it was super, super beautiful. It is about this boy who lives in this tiny town in England. He has this new babysitter, and she's not everything she seems to be. She really wreaks havoc for the entire town and this boy's life specifically. And so he goes to this house at the end of the lane that has this mother, grandmother, and daughter living there, and they have magic, and he tries to get them to help his town and help himself and his house from this horrible babysitter, basically. It was just really, really super beautiful, and I loved the perspective of the little boy. I thought that he was a great kid to get to read from. His point of view was amazing. He's so smart and so interesting, and I thought he just had a great voice in this book. And the magical realism element of it was amazing, the way it was intertwined with this real town. I ended up giving this book a full 5 stars because it was just beautifully written and managed to tell a full story that was complete and fully fleshed in a very short amount of time. And Neil Gaiman was amazing as the narrator of this, so I just found no fault in it and gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, in February, I started out by reading We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda, I'm going to get her name wrong. It's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I am so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But this is basically a text version of a TED Talk that Chimamanda did about feminism and what it was like to live in Africa and experience the sexism that she experienced and why it's unjust. It was very, very short. I read it on International Women's Day, which just felt so right, and I was really inspired by it despite how short it was. I really want to read more by her. I know she wrote this amazing book called Americana that I'm thinking about picking up really soon just because she seems like a very intelligent and fierce woman, and she was just amazing. I watched the actual TED Talk and was, again, really inspired by it, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars just because it was really short, and I wished that it had been longer and that she had maybe expanded a little bit more on the injustices that she saw in the text version. Next I read It Starts Like This, which is a poetry book by Shelby Lee. I really enjoyed it. I thought that many of the poems were really, really real and just elicited a lot of emotion out of me, and I could relate to quite a few of them, but they were very, very well done. I believe this was her first collection of poetry, and that is really impressive in my opinion. The way she writes makes it seem like she's been writing poetry for years and years, and that this wouldn't be her first published work, but it is, and it's really great. I highly recommend it if you like The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace. A lot of similar style of poetry, a lot of similar themes in it, so I would definitely recommend picking that up. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next I read When the Moon Was Ours by Anna Marie McLemore, and I did a full Goodreads review of this, which I will leave linked down below because I got an electronic copy of it from NetGalley. I loved this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars just because it was a little bit slow in the beginning with its pacing, but once I got probably like 35% in, it just flew right by for me. This is about this girl named Miel who kind of miraculously comes into this town by falling out of a water well, and she ends up befriending this boy named Sam who lives next door, and it's about them growing up together and then having more of a relationship and having that develop. It is a magical realism book. Both Miel and the girl that she lives with have magic, as well as a couple other characters in town, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. The way that it interweaves this magic and the type of magic that's in it is not quite in your face. It's not like obvious magic, but it's very like culturally linked magic. Like the stuff that people can do in this town is very much linked to aspects of their culture. And it is an LGBTQ plus book and has amazing themes on self-discovery and all those sorts of things and relationships in that sense. And like I said, I did a full review of it that explains my feelings on it even more in depth, so I will leave that link down below, but I really, really strongly recommend this. It was a very well done book that is absolutely exquisite. Next I read Crazy by Linda Vegan Phillips. This is a YA book that is told in verse, and it's about this girl in the 1950s whose mom has bipolar disorder, and she's been spiraling and lashing out a lot. She's just trying to struggle with getting a real diagnosis and understanding what exactly is wrong with her mom, because there wasn't a lot of understanding or diagnosis in the 1950s for mental disorders. And so this was really interesting because, you know, there's a lot of books written nowadays that take place nowadays about mental illness, but not many written in 1950s, and it's a lot different because the stereotypes and the practices that even medicine used back then were so different than what's used now because there's just no knowledge back then. So it was really heartbreaking to see some of the things that her mom struggled with, that she struggled with. She started to worry about herself and what she might be like if she has bipolar disorder, and the whole thing was just really up and down. It was a roller coaster. A lot of stuff happens. I really felt for our main character just because she struggles with how to help her mom and how much just like back off and not do anything, because it's a hard line to fill when, you know, your parent has bipolar disorder and you want to help, but you also want to be a kid at the same time and you want to let them be a parent. And I know a bit about this. My mom has bipolar disorder, so I was really, really interested in this novel. She actually recommended it to me and lent it to me. I ended up very, very much enjoying this for obvious reasons because I related very much to the main character, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars and would definitely recommend it, especially because it's written in verse, which is an appropriate format for this. I thought that that made a lot of sense. But if you were to read it, you'd get through it really fast because it's written in verse. So again, highly recommend. Next I read Burial Rites by Hannah Kent, which I read for book club for February, and this book was absolutely outstanding. It is, as the author Hannah Kent describes, a dark love story to Iceland. It really evokes this sense of a landscape and culture and land that is really harsh and really hard to live in. And it is just exasperated by the fact that our main character, Agnes, is super, super lonely and in one of the hardest times that you could even imagine. So the story is about this woman who actually existed in real life named Agnes. she was the last woman sentenced to the death sentence in Iceland, and it takes place in the mid-1800s and is just so lonely but beautiful. It just describes the landscape with so many beautiful words that it really just makes this image in your head that is just crystal clear, and Agnes's loneliness is conveyed really, really well, and everything about it is just so well done. I'm in absolute awe of it. I just think it's amazing that this was Hannah Kent's first novel and that she's so young and wrote such an amazing book. It gets really wordy at times, but for me it was so worth it to be so wordy because the words themselves just, like I said, painted this amazing picture and really had you feeling for this person who you didn't expect to feel for, because Agnes is a convicted murderer. You don't expect to feel for her, but you really, really do, and she's in this really tough situation, and I think that it was just written in a really amazing and really connected way. Next I read Changeless by Gail Carriger. This is the second book of the Parasol Protectorate series, which follows Alexia Terabody. She is a soulless, or a preternatural, which means she has no soul, and she lives in Victorian steampunk England, in a England that has supernatural beings. So the werewolves, ghosts, vampires are all supernatural, which means they all have excess soul. And this follows her as she basically is a kick-ass heroine and defeats evil and does it wearing Victorian clothing, and Alexia is my everything. She is one of the best female main characters I've read in a very long time, and this series is amazing. It has steampunk and alternate history and romance and fantasy and historical settings, and it just is everything. I have 2 books left in the series, and I definitely plan on finishing them by May because this is one of the best series I've read in a long time. I love it. I'm addicted to it completely. Next, I read My Lady Jane by Cynthia Han, Jodi Meadows, and Brody Ashton, and I listened to this on audiobook through Audible, and the narrator did a fantastic job. She had a sense of humor right, she had the timing and the pacing perfectly, and I was just absolutely in love with the way she narrated the book. And this is my favorite book I have read all this year. Hands down, 5 out of 5 stars. It's hilarious. It's like an alternate history version of the story of Lady Jane Grey, who was queen for 9 days before she was beheaded. And this is an alternate version of her story in which England has what's called Effians, and those are basically humans who can change into animals, like all kinds of animals, horses, dogs, cats, ferrets, everything you can imagine they can possibly turn into. And it's just hilarious. And the fact that it's written by 3 authors, you would never even know that, because each author gets their own character's point of view, but they do that so well that it feels like it's written by one author, and that's just amazing in and of itself. But I was absolutely dying of laughter while I was listening to this. Just the humor is spot on, and it just was so cute and so wonderful. I love it so, so much, and I highly recommend it. Like I said, 5 out of 5 stars easily. Next, I read Blameless, which is the 3rd book in the Parasol Protectorate series. Again, I can't tell you what this book is about because it's the 3rd book in the series, so you kind of have to have read the first 2 in order to know what this one's about. But I loved this one just as much as the rest of them. It had a lot of drama going on, got kind of sciencey at some parts, which made it kind of difficult to read, but I understand why it did that. It was pretty necessary for the story. But I plan on doing a full series review of the Parasol Protectorate series once I finish it, so look out for that in the coming months. Next, I read A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, and I read this for a book club called Seize the Book, which is hosted by Adele, who is Sleepy Bookworm on Tumblr. So I will leave all her social media down below, as well as her Goodreads book club group, Seize the Book, if you're interested in knowing more about it or in joining. Our March book was A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, which I absolutely loved. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was so beautiful and so touching and so heartbreaking. I really went into it expecting like a kid's book that was pretty surface, but this book got really tough at parts. His story and the monster itself was just a complete surprise in how hard it hit me, and I highly recommend this. It's a wonderful, wonderful story, and it has some great pictures in it that are drawn, and it's just a beautiful, well-done story all around, in my opinion. Next, I read By Your Side by Cassie West, which was kind of a letdown for me, actually. This is a YA contemporary in which our 2 main characters meet at a library when they are both locked in over a 3-day weekend and have to spend the whole library together, which is the 2 of them. This sounds like it's going to be right up my alley, but it ended up being really disappointing. One, because most of it doesn't even take place in the library. Like, I would say maybe like 33 to 40% of the book actually happens in the library, which is not what I was looking for when I read this. Also, it's just very surface. Our characters, you know, you don't know a lot about them, and their relationship is just really not that in-depth, and I just didn't care a lot about the whole book. It's easy to get through because it's a really fluffy, like, YA contemporary, so I read it in one sitting, but it just didn't really do anything for me. I think that the story wasn't as fully done as it could have been, and it just, like I said, was really a letdown, honestly. Next, I read Spinning by Tilly Walden, which I got an electronic copy of from NetGalley for a review, and I did do a full review of it on Goodreads, and I'll leave a link to that review in the description box below. And this is a graphic memoir about Tilly herself when she was a young to late teen, and she was an ice skater, and she had some like identity and coming of age issues about, one, whether or not she would even like ice skating any longer. She was thinking she just did it because it was something she was good at. And two, she tries to come out to her family. She realized she's a lesbian and has some issues with that, and just a bunch of other things, some other insecurities. And it was nice, you know. I gave it like 3.5 out of 5 stars just because sometimes it was a little confusing. It would jump from one time in her life to another without any sort of like connection between the two times, and that was really confusing. And she'd sometimes only spend one frame or one page on a time in her life, and I didn't understand why she did that. Sometimes it seems like if you're only going to invest one frame in it and then not come back to it ever again, why even put it in there? So that was confusing, but the story itself was really interesting and really personal, so I did, like I said, give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read another NetGalley book, and that was Point and Shoot by Allison Stone. This is a mystery novel that takes place with our main character who owns a ballet studio, and she inherited it from her mother who has dementia and can no longer run the studio. And so instead of doing her dream of becoming a police officer, she owns the ballet studio instead. An accident happens with one of her students, and she thinks that it was a murder, so she gets one of her brother's cop friends to help her investigate and figure out if it was actually a murder or not. And this was actually pretty good. I wasn't expecting a lot when I went into it. I found out a little bit into the book that it was actually Christian fiction, but it was a very light-handed Christian fiction. Like, it was not really heavy on the Christian themes at all. The writing was really professional, really well done, and I actually really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The only thing I didn't like was, you know, if you're gonna have a book have a ballet sort of setting or theme, I feel like you should know the technical terms, and sometimes she would do things like, say, pirouette thingy, and that just was a little bit silly, because if it's a ballet book, you should know like what a pirouette is, and if it's not a pirouette thingy, then what is it? Is it a fouette? Like, you should know your terms if you're going to write a ballet book. So that was a little bit irritating, but everything else was just really well done. And if this sounds interesting at all to you, I recommend you check out my Goodreads review down below and see if you think it'd be something you'd like, and I will leave it in the description box. And next, I did a reread of Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Illyria Steins. I'm not going to go into much detail about this because everybody knows I love this book. 5 out of 5 stars upon rereading it. Still have a lot of emotions. Probably going to do a video about Aristotle and Dante just because I have a lot to say and my heart is feeling a lot of things, even though it's my 3rd time reading the book. So I'll probably do a video about that in the near future, so look out for that. And finally, the book that I just finished yesterday, which is If I Fixed You by Abigail Johnson. And this is about a 16-year-old girl named Jill whose parents just separated and her mom left her. And she's kind of a tomboy. She works in her dad's auto shop with her dad. And a new boy moves in next door, and he really helps her flesh out a lot of the family issues she's going through, and boy, are there a lot of family issues. Some of them involve her friends, and it is dramatic. But Jill is a very mature main character, and I really enjoyed her perspective. I really felt like I got to know her very well and understand her decisions, her habits, her personality, and I liked that. I liked her as a person and really enjoyed it. You know, when I went to it and I thought that it was going to be a YA contemporary fluffy romance book that it was focused on the romance, but it wasn't. It was actually a lot deeper, a lot more grounded, a lot more real than that, and had a lot of actual, like, real life tough issues going on with the romance kind of on the side. Like, the stuff with the romance kind of had to be in there because some of the family stuff involves the romance stuff, so it was intertwined, and it couldn't not be intertwined. But I really, really love this. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars, maybe 4 stars. I don't remember for sure, but I did do a full review of it because I got it from NetGalley, so I will leave a link to my Goodreads review down below if you're interested in my full review of it. So that is it. Those are all the books that I have read so far in 2017. 20 in the months of January, February, and March, and I will be doing another one of these after June for the months of April, May, and June, so look out for that wrap up then. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of any of these books if you have read them down below, and I'd love to know some books that you have read yourself in 2017 so far, so leave a comment for me and feel free to like this video if you like it, and I will see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much for watching and sticking through this video if you did, and happy reading.